All right, are you ready?
Ready?
Ready as well. Good evening and welcome back. My name's Matthew McLaughlin.
And I'm Daniel Sandner.
And we have some notes for...
Gladiator 2.
Yes. Gladiator.
Gladiator,
yes. So we just watched it here at the apartment, and we definitely have some notes.
We have a lot of notes.
I think, well, actually, to begin with, if you're new here, this is the We Have Notes podcast. We basically watch movies every week, we talk about them, and then at the end, we give a 5-star rating to the movies that you can find on Letterboxd. Our Letterboxd is OTW Video, and you can see all of our reviews on there.
Absolutely.
I think it's a good idea to start with the positives, get that out of the way, and move on.
Yeah, needless to say, neither one of us seemed very fond of Gladiator. Definitely was not particularly like. So yeah, positives I think is a great place to start. So
Yes.
We both spoke a little bit about the intro being kind of cool.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little more about that?
Definitely. So we've had a lot of sequels recently. We've had a lot of different things that tell a story after something that's beloved because people like making money with their franchises. And a lot of things, a lot of different IPs go about showing the old movie in interesting ways. A lot of the time they suck. One positive on this, I think that the beginning, showing in the style of the, what was it, Scott, what's that studio?
Scott Free.
Yeah, the Scott Free, which is like the painted guy running away, turning into an eagle. It was that exact same paint style that then showed famous scenes from Gladiator, the original.
It was a cool idea. Some of it was really janky. Part of me was like, I kind of wonder if this was actually just like AI done.
I was kind of thinking that too.
When it got to the people, like the eyes got really weird and stuff. And so the whole thing was done kind of, so it was done like an acrylic painting, I guess, or like an oil painting maybe of that time.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was cool. And it was a good recap. And it was while the opening title crawl was going on. And then the rest of the movie.
Yeah, seriously. We had this great thing, show the remembrance. Oh, yeah, I remember that. Oh, my God, yes. And it's just the opening crawl. So you get your fun stuff, and then we're into the movie pretty right off the bat. And...
Well, okay, so sticking on good things then.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, sticking on good things. I thought that the world building, not like world building, but like the spectacle was definitely increased on this one. You could tell that they not only had more money to play with, but that it was done in not 2000 or whenever the other one was made, to where the look of Rome was big and it was grand. They started off with the ships at the beginning and everything
Love
too.
the ships.
As they came to Africa. I thought all of that looked cool. I thought that generally speaking, like the production value was there. And I guess in classic Ridley Scott fashion, that was fine.
I would agree. It seemed like it was just turning the knob up a little bit. I would say if there's any criticism of that, it was that the main opening scene, I had no idea where we were at, but it all looked really nice.
For sure.
The establishing shots that then combined with the actual real sets that they were obviously filming on was great.
Yeah. I think that was maybe this movie's strongest thing, in my opinion, was that its sets were great. Its costume design was great. Generally speaking, its ability to build that world and work within it was great. I thought that was fine. You could tell that they had lots of money to play with.
So much.
And so, yeah, everything that was CGI slathered, at least in like the world stuff, was really cool. We could talk about the monkeys and stuff later, which I know everybody has talked about. We could talk about them too.
Or the sharks. There's sharks in Gladiator.
Yeah. So I don't know. I would say to its credit, it definitely used its money in the way of the production. Like the first one, you could tell was a lot more frugal with it. It kept it had the big set pieces for sure, but they were definitely they built up in location and the certain locations that they shot within. Like I mean, his journey was Marcus Aurelius' journey was building from being a slave to growing in fame. Maximus, thank you. Maximus was growing in fame, and so everything was getting bigger and bigger. In this one, they just start you off with a full-fledged battle where I guess the Romans are taking over this town in Africa, and then from there, it only gets bigger. So with every massive set piece came a lot of CGI to mostly good avail, I'd say.
I would agree. Especially the set pieces. Whoever did that stuff, and you could tell with the boats especially that they were CG, but it wasn't distracting.
Yeah.
It was like, yeah, that's a hard-ass thing to film. Why would you not do it in CG these days?
Right.
And they looked good.
Well, and the crowds and things too. Like some of
Crowds
the
were pretty
big
good.
spectacle of the Coliseum was generally good. And actually, I only thought it fell apart a little bit when they got closer to the crowds, and then the dubbing didn't match what the crowd was doing. But we talk about that later. But I don't know. Like I was looking a lot at the crowds behind when they were down having their scenes, and you could tell a fair amount of it was digital, but like they were colorful and they had individual characters in there. So I thought that like the Coliseum shots and everything looking down, giving you the spectacle was generally pretty good.
You know, there was a shot that was leading up to, I think it's when this main character of Gladiator 2 is being transported to Rome, and we have this, what would be a modern day standard drone shot, just kind of a revolve around the side, and it was completely CG, and it looked great.
It was sharp.
It looked great. It looked like, oh, wow, this is a bustling city for its time, and the Colosseum is proud above it. Mm-hmm. I have no idea how historically accurate it is, but it kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's a movie.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, and that's, I think, something a lot of people have delved into, I've read a little bit into, and at the end of the day, just taking it at face value, it seemed fine.
Yeah.
We could talk, I have some thoughts on that in terms of how it relates to the first one and why I think this one was so inferior to the first one.
Sure. Like talking about CGI specifically?
Well, talking about the historical part of it, how the
Yeah.
CGI influenced your perception of the reality of the situation, that I'd love to touch on a little bit later because it was interesting. But yeah, sticking with the good things, that's about where it ended for me. I thought Denzel was fine. I thought he was definitely the coolest part of it. His story arc was the coolest.
Yeah, he actually had one.
He actually had one, and it was an interesting angle, and he was larger than life in a lot of his stuff. We talked about the announcer guy for the Coliseum. He was cool.
He was the best. He was
cool.
the best.
Yeah, he was awesome, man. Everything else, though, I don't know. I think that's where it ends for me. I think that was probably the end of the list of goods for me.
For me, I was not happy about Pedro Pascal being, cast in this. Mm-hmm. I thought that it was just, again, like people call him the flavor of the month eternally, and I don't hate him. I actually really liked him in that Nicolas Cage movie and in The Mandalorian, and like, he's not a bad actor.
He's a very specific actor to cast, I think.
And to his credit, I actually thought he was pretty darn good in this.
Fair enough.
I don't think he was amazing. It was absolutely great that he had nothing to do with Maximus per se, because it kind of ties in. We'll talk about that. But the fact that Pedro Pascal's character was just a general who had his own conflicts and was tired and stuff, and he was just kind of his own thing, he pulled it off well enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He wasn't distracting being,
totally.
An A-list at this point.
See, and I agree. I think he did fine, but I still think it was miscast. I think most of the people in this movie were miscast.
Yeah, and I guess we'll have an interesting discussion, because I think this one's going to be a good one to talk about whether things are miscast or if the characters are just bad.
Poorly written, poorly developed. I think that's a fair point, actually.
Do you actually want to start with that? Dive into
Is that
question?
all your good stuff?
If something comes up, I'll say it, but that's a very comprehensive list.
I think that's mine too.
CG, Pascal was better. Coliseum announcer was the best character in the entire movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's about it.
That's about it.
Cool opening sequence and
Boats
some decent
cool.
enough CGI.
Boats are cool. I'm not going to lie. I like the historical boat battles.
Well, and
Those
I
are
thought,
cool.
I guess maybe the little cherry on top was, I think the physical combat in this was generally good. I thought it was generally
some of the
well done.
choreography was pretty solid.
Yeah.
There were times where I was completely out of the story, and then all of a sudden there'd be a fight scene, and there was like, whoa, that's got impact. Whoa, oh wow, they're going hard.
Yeah, then they were pretty brutal.
That stuff was good.
Which is good, but yeah.
Clearly some. It can't be all of it, because a lot of it, you don't punch the dude with the sword, you cut the dude with the sword.
Yeah, there was, I think that describes a lot of this movie. So, okay, so going into what you said then, whether the people were poorly cast or if it was poorly written.
Yes.
I came to the conclusion by the end of the movie that this was kind of an AI written movie. That it stunk of all of that. It stunk of clunky dialogue, poorly gelling scenes. Like the scenes didn't really ever flow together. We were confused several times through it. We can talk about that too. On what was happening and who was who and why any of it was happening at all. That it literally just felt like, hey, ChatGPT, write me a sequel to Gladiator 1 with all of the good things and all the callbacks to it. And that was kind of it. It did all the same things the first one did, but way worse. And then added worse things to that. So it felt fake.
Yes.
Felt
very poorly written.
Yeah, ill-conceived.
So we have, and I would probably say it's an unwritten rule of this podcast. When we're watching something in theaters, obviously we just can't pause it, but sometimes we just got to watch stuff here. And I think it's kind of an unwritten rule that we don't want to pause the movie. We want to see it through the whole way and just experience it. And I had to break that unwritten rule, and I had to pause the movie literally at the halfway mark. Here's why. It was because this movie starts off with a guy we don't know and his, we find out later, wife. We don't know the relation. They don't even kiss. They don't hold hands. So we don't know if it's brother and sister.
Moment, and that's it.
They were kind of just there. We don't know where this place is. All we know is that the Romans are coming. So we don't know who these people are. We don't know what tribe it is. We don't even know if it's... We get one line that's something about... It's such a weird term, but it was like Afro something. Do you remember that?
Briefly. I mean, they talked about it a little bit when he came back to the emperors and they were talking about how, okay, well, now you've conquered a part of Africa.
Right, so we find that out later.
Yeah, you get that like 45 minutes in.
Yeah, like 45 minutes in. So we just get absolutely nothing except for that the Romans are coming. We then see these random people that we don't know on land getting ready for a battle. We know nothing about them. We have no idea if they're even good people. We have no idea if they've done something to deserve the Romans going after them. We just know the Romans are coming. Then we cut to the Romans. That stuff's sick. There's cool boats. We find out that Pascal is the leader of the Roman army, or I guess navy in this case, same difference. And we learn a lot of stuff about them through all the, nonverbal stuff. So that worked. Then the battle ensues, and we still don't know. Guy gets clocked on the head. Main character falls in after again, we find out later, his wife gets shot in the chest by an arrow and dies. There's weird, afterlife scenes. And then fast forward. All of a sudden, main character is a gladiator. Because...
Prisoner of war.
Because he has to be, I guess. And he goes through gladiator stuff. And he goes through more gladiator stuff. And eventually ends up in Rome. And at that point, we then have this weird subplot that turns into the main plot where we figure out who this guy is. It's been a mystery the whole time. And it turns out that he is Lucius, the little boy from Gladiator 1. Do you ever care what happened to him?
I had to pick my brain thoroughly to remember who the heck Lucius was and why I should care about him.
I didn't care about him. Nobody cared about him.
No, he was certainly not a mainstay of the first movie.
So we go through this entire thing. It is literally 50 minutes into the movie, and I pause it. I have to break our rule because I'm so freaking confused. Now, one of the biggest problems with this is that they go through and they actually say, or no, not even say, they introduce a whole new scene. So they actually have a direct flashback to Gladiator 1 where Maximus is lying on the ground dying and he says Lucius is safe. I remember that happening because that was a key moment. That was part of his motivation, was making sure that boy was safe and everything.
That he could grow up in a better Rome than he experienced.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maximus's sacrifice was worth it and all that. Turns out right from there, they cut to something that they shot in modern day, showing his mom
being put on a horse,
having to send him away. For what reason? We don't know. We don't really get an answer. We had to theorize about it.
Yeah, we kind of came to the conclusion that, because he was royal blood, Rome didn't want another emperor at the moment, and they might have killed him. I guess they never said that.
We just
kind of theorized that.
We had to theorize.
We had to pause for like 15 minutes and figure this out because she mentioned the mom peppered in. Sorry, continue your story.
Yeah. So there's all this backfill, and a lot of people call it retconning, where they change stuff in the last film that they just do actively to make their plot work in the second movie, and it just pulls you out to the point where
wonder why do you make a second movie at that
Why
point?
make a second movie? If you can't go off the first one or in the same world and it's like a different story, then why do it? Except for cash grab.
They're just like, yeah, well, just Terminator worked. They retconned, 3, 4, 5 times. We'll just kill John Connor like they did. Well, and it was weird because we had to rewind it because the mom comes into the cell that Lucius is staying in and says, no, your name is Lucius and you're the son of Maximus. She kind of peppers it in there. And the scene went by and we all kind of looked at each other and we're like, wait, what? Like Maximus, like Russell Crowe, like Maximus? Like he had a son who got killed in the first movie.
Yep.
And Lucius was around, but there wasn't like some affair that we ever knew of. And you couldn't possibly think his character of doing that. And so we stopped and we're like, wait a minute. And then the movie kept going and they kept leaning into it. And you're like, okay, they just retconned this. Yeah. Stupidly so.
So during the pause, we figured this out. Luckily, Miranda caught it. She rewound it like Daniel was saying. And oh my God, they actually go for it. They actually say...
Lean right into it.
She says it. She says in half of a line that nobody can remember. Daniel and I missed it. Miranda got it. And then... It turns out that this guy who we have no idea who his name is the son of Maximus. Ooh, Shyamalan twist. Bet you weren't expecting that. And it just made me mad. We're all sitting there like, wait, in the first one, Lucius is not Maximus's son.
No.
And for anybody wondering,
implied.
It's not implied. It's not even close. Lucius is not Maximus' son.
We looked into it.
We looked into it. We looked at the quotes from the movie and everything. And Lucilla, Lucius's mom, and Maximus, yes, they used to date or something. They talk about how they had a past before. Then later in the movie, they're reminiscing about how each of them has a family with kids. Both of them, each individually, happen to be about 8 years old. So it is confirmed that they had separate children, that they did not share kids. So why in the second one are you making this random kid that we don't really care that much about Maximus's son?
I don't know. Because you can.
Because I guess
because ChatGPT said so.
Because ChatGPT's like,
look, this is the only way your script's gonna work. Man.
Maximus won the crowd. Okay,
exactly.
Hear me out.
You're like,
Maximus
we've got to plug it so many times because that's what gets butts and seats.
Let's talk about that too. It was so bad. The writing in this made it so that anybody who did catch that line where it's literally spelled out that this main character, again, I can't remember his name, like Hollow or something.
Yeah, well, say just Lucius, I guess, because that's what
Lucius,
he became known as.
Yeah, that he is Maximus's son. That becomes apparent because she literally says it. Then, throughout the rest of the movie, about probably 7 times, would you say?
His identity.
It's his identity, and he literally will say, or somebody else will say, remember, your father, Maximus. And then he's like, my father. Maximus.
And then they read it on a ring, and then it was on a wall.
That's my father. Maximus.
Yeah,
you remember.
Very heavy.
Remember the guy from the first movie? That's my dad. Oh,
you're like, if you have to crutch on your first movie that much, also your second movie isn't worth anything on its own and should not have been made.
It should not have been made. This is just
bad. Reeks of clickbait. You're just like, you're here because you liked the first one, and that's it.
Which is horrible because Gladiator, the first one, was a masterpiece. I have no problem saying that. It's legitimately one of the best movies ever made. And this one completely shits on it in horrible ways. I mean, the fact that the director goes back and basically retcons everything. Hey, my main character, I don't really have a backstory or a way to tie him in, so Maximus, you're now his dad.
Yeah.
That's not how it works, dude.
And it's not to say that like every sequel always has to be a complete sequel to the next one, or that it has to be some amazing continuation. But if you're gonna make a sequel after what, 15? What is it now?
I think
it was 2000. Is it seriously 25 years?
It's somewhere in there. I can't actually remember.
Because it was the early 2000s. But if you're gonna make a sequel after several decades, then clearly there's a reason you're making it. And in this case, it reeked of, we just want more money. Yeah. That the studio contacted Ridley, said, hey, you got another one of these in you? And he's like, sure, I'll phone it in like I have for the last couple movies I've done. We'll make it like Napoleon. It'll suck, but it'll get butts and seats.
Yeah, we've been wanted to...
they're like, here's $250 million. Go ham at it.
Torin, if you're watching this, please let us know in the comments if this is how you felt about Napoleon.
Yeah.
Because we didn't watch Napoleon based off of your recommendation, lack thereof. And we'd recommend, if you haven't seen this, don't watch it.
Because it's from what you described is very much like that. It's a movie that just really sounds good. Like I was kind of all for this when it was coming out because we love Gladiator 1. You could tell that we were the exact demographic they wanted in those seats because we had this great appreciation for it, great love for the first movie, this nostalgia for it, and they're like, hey, remember this one?
Yeah,
you should come see this.
You should come see this.
And then you leave the theater and you're like, I swear, if there's a third one, I'm not even getting near that thing with a 10-foot pole.
So bad.
Yeah, so that's the script.
That's the script, the basis, the backbone, the
dialogue
foundation.
Sequences, yeah, because the dialogue sequences, when they happened, were bad and illogical and didn't explain anything. Like, we were lost pretty thoroughly the whole time. And then there were the great fight sequences, and it felt like, they were juggling here's the spectacle of the Colosseum, but also there's, the government, like, corruption side, the fighting against not government, but fighting against the rulers kind of thing, backstory there. And then there was the little like Denzel thing where he was kind of fighting them. Those were maybe interesting enough arcs, but they were never really fleshed out. They were all kind of doing their own thing. And then, big scene, big fight scene. And then Maximus. And then some people die that you don't really care about. And then Wheatfield.
Yes.
Again.
Yes, Wheatfield again.
With salt in the wound.
Oh, Lord. They had so many loose ends. So many.
That they just created.
They were trying to do absolutely everything. Because the first movie did a lot, but it was all very focused and plot serving, or at least character serving. And in this one, they tried to do absolutely everything from Rome falling to there's these two new emperors, which we never found out how they came to power, and that never made sense.
Yeah, that would have been kind of nice to have known. Because they were ridiculous and kind of good.
Yeah.
In that way?
Yeah, I want to dive into that because that's another huge plot hole. If Lucilla had to send her son Lucius away for fear of the people of Rome killing him because he is literally the heir to the throne.
Right.
How the hell did these guys, these lame-ass guys who are complete fools the entire movie, how did they come to power? Is that just Ridley's trying to show us how corrupt Rome was? And then how come when they found out that Lucius was back in Rome, all of a sudden, miraculously, they couldn't pull him out of prison? He is the heir to the throne. Or is that because you said that he's Maximus's son, therefore making him a bastard child and not actually being the rightful heir, or what?
And it doesn't make any sense. They didn't know or didn't care. See, and I think therein lies a big problem for me outside of the just really crappy script, is that you have the first one where, like you said, it was much more focused and much more logical and character driven. It was grounded a lot more in reality. It felt like a real movie. And I know that each of these movies have truths to them. I know that there were twin emperors or whatever at one point. And so there is some factual truth in some of that. But then you have, the sharks and the Colosseum and the weird apes and all of that crap we could talk about. That in this one completely pulls you out of any sense of real story, of reality, of any of that you could have possibly had. And I think that's what the first one does so masterfully, is it feels almost like, I'm not going to say quite like a documentary, but it feels self-contained and it feels gritty and real in its own way, that you never have those moments of, you're constantly questioning who's who and why, because this one is, the first one is so focused, and you're following the height of this general who then falls and becomes a slave and grows back up, all while this corrupt Rome is developing with, great performance from Joaquin Phoenix and everything too. And then he comes up and he conquers, and they both die in the process and all of that. And so it's great. And it's closed, and it's not 7 stories, and it's one really good story, and it feels real. And this one just so many times pulls you way out of that, whether it was the big sequences or the really poorly written characters or the bad dialogue sequences or plethora of other things. When we get to cinematography, I have some other notes on that, because there were plenty of times where their choice in shots and angles just, I was like, what is happening and where am I?
Yeah.
So we can get to that, but
the best example of what you just said is a scene comparison. Opening fight scene opening battle in the new Gladiator. We'll go there first. In Gladiator 2, we open with this crazy battle. Nothing's been established. That's the first problem. We don't know where we are. We don't know anything. and there's just people, and the Romans show up. So I get what he's trying to do. He's like, last time we showed the Romans doing everything. This time we'll show it from the opposite side. Not that clever because he forgot, or if he just omitted it, that's a worse sin. But he just completely forgot what made the original battle scene in Gladiator 1 so great. In that one scene, you see how much respect Maximus has earned as a general, how he has just as much power as the emperor Marcus Aurelius, how he has more power than Aurelius's son. You see all of this stuff in the opening battle. Now, what's really interesting is that in the opening battle of Gladiator 1, if I remember correctly, we have no idea who they're fighting.
No, I don't think it's ever mentioned.
I think it was like Northerners or some general term. And then luckily the geography really helped with that because we all know that Italy and Rome and stuff doesn't really have that many pine trees, or at least Rome isn't known for pine trees. So them fighting in a wooded forest feels like England, feels something more north, and you can just hear that stuff. You get to, so that's a great commonality between these two battles, is that we don't know anything about one side. The problem is that in the beginning, or in Gladiator 1, the not knowing about the basically Rome's enemies that they're conquering literally didn't matter. It could be anybody. That was the point. Maximus is going to do the best job on any battlefield on any day. That's what it demonstrated to his character. Now, if we go to Gladiator 2, we have no idea who the Romans are going after this time. And it matters. You have to care about your characters. And in this one, we get nothing.
Well, they were trying to make it matter for two characters on each side. So you didn't really have, it wasn't necessarily you needed an enemy, but you needed to have at least a clear focus for the beginning of the movie. For like, okay, who are we focusing on? Why should we care?
I had no idea if I should be rooting for Lucius.
Right, yeah. So you had Lucius, who was this guy who jumped into a battle, and we never learned how he got to be good at fighting at all, and all of this. Who was in this battle, and apparently he had a wife who got shot, and then that was sad, and whatever. With then Pedro Pascal coming in and being kind of a badass, and that was it. That was your opening battle. You're like, okay, here are these two characters and their zones, and cool. Okay.
Yippee.
And it kind of continued on that track, sadly. It's like Pedro Pascal's character got a little bit of growth as he actually had some sort of a bigger fight, and he had things to do and was opposed and all of this. But Lucius's character just kind of got pulled in as a slave, and then he just kind of existed, and then someone said his dad's name, and then he just was his dad, I guess. And I can't tell if he the script was bad, but like, I can't tell if it was also a little bit him just being like not really not doing anything interesting with his character.
Like Lucius' character?
Yeah,
or
because
Pascal's?
his arc, Pedro Pascal's character, I think he did with what he could. I think he did fine.
I think so.
For what's his face? For Lucius's character, I don't know. He just was so stale the entire time. He was the same thing the whole time. He didn't get any change. He had conversations with people that brought out some little details about him, but like at the end of the day, when I just kind of picture his character, it's just his face and that's it. I know nothing more. I care not more, not less. He just kind of was there, and I guess his dad was important, and that's maybe what I don't know, dude.
So do you think that Lucius won the crowd, or
no? Did anyone? I don't know.
Unlike his father.
Well, and what that meant, though, especially with such two-dimensional characters and bad writing, is that when they got killed off, who cares? You know, Pedro Pascal, I guess, was a little interesting, except the way he got killed off was kind of funny.
Yeah, those are the most accurate arrows I've ever
arrows,
seen.
just straight to him, right past Lucius, from what, like 300 yards. Anyways, and so when people got killed off and the stakes were raised and stuff, okay, awesome. Seriously, and that's when it felt like a ChatGPT script, because like it's like, yeah, these events happened. They didn't mean anything. The dialogue points in between happened. They didn't really grow anything. And then people started getting killed, and you're like, okay, I don't care. It's just another battle sequence at this point.
Absolutely.
So, I don't know. It just felt so two-dimensional. And yeah, the opening battle, even in the first one, like you mentioned, had so much more gravity because it put you in a headspace to commiserate with this character right off the bat. Because right after the battle, when he gets turned on and he, people beat the crap out of him and all of that, and it all starts, you care instantly. In this one, he gets kicked off the building, he falls in the water, and he sees his dead wife, and then he gets kidnapped, and you're like, okay, I don't know where this is going, but okay, I guess I'm watching, and you continue to feel that.
You just reminded me too. In the in Gladiator 1, when Maximus gets betrayed, you get to learn about Commodus's character too. You get to see that he wants his dad's approval, but his dad, Commodus's dad, Marcus Aurelius, is not going to give it to Commodus because he sees evil in his heart.
He has to earn it.
He has to earn it. He then becomes jealous of Maximus, who does have it. And even though Maximus, all he wants to do is go live his life on his farm with his wife and son that he has absolutely earned, and that Marcus Aurelius has granted to him, he is then not allowed to do that because Commodus is a petty, horrible human being that can't have anybody be better than him in his father's eyes or anybody else's. So again,
the stakes are actually unfair.
It's completely unfair, and we learn about
audience
everybody. In one opening battle, we learn about everybody. Who are the players? What do they want? And where they're at in life. We learn all of that in one battle. And all we learn in Gladiator 2 is there's a dude
who's successful in what he's fighting battle after battle, and that's it.
And that's it.
And there's some stuff happening outside of the Colosseum that we should maybe care about.
Right. Even when Pedro Pascal's character, and I wish I remembered his name. I can't remember it. We only heard it once, so that's not my fault. But when he gets back to Rome, we don't even learn that much about the emperors. All of a sudden, they're there, and I think that his character could have had a really good arc. Yeah, Cassius, you're right. They did chance his name. So Pedro Pascal is Cassius in this movie. And Cassius gets back to Rome, and the two twin emperors, they basically want him to go on more conquests. And he's tired of it. He hates seeing the women and children crying for their murdered, fathers and husbands, and then being burned in front of them. That you could see that in Pascal's character. But you don't really know why they want to go on more. You hear vanity, but that's about it. And the emperors just come off as crazy.
Stupid, yeah.
They're stupid and
realizes
crazy.
That and doesn't want to be part of it.
Yeah, we don't understand, okay, why is nobody standing up to them? We don't understand, are they blood? Well, no, because Aurelius's line is gone with Lucius. So they can't be blood. They must have come to power somehow, but we don't find that
And there's no one protecting them. There's no, strong family member who's no, if you kill them, then you're screwed.
Right.
They're just these weak, limp noodle of characters that are just there, and they're annoying. And I guess that's it. They can maybe call guards. I don't know.
Yeah, in fact, Denzel Washington's character was able to figure that out.
He
knew
overtook
that
them
they
like
were
that.
weak, and he overtook them like that. No problem. So these emperors that are supposed to hold all this power and everything have none. And the little that they do, which is basically just status and name, they give up freely because they are stupid and because they are weak. So one man is able to completely conquer Rome.
And I think that's what gave...
How is that a threat?
It's not, because I think that in the previous movie, that's what gave Joaquin Phoenix's character more weight, was that he was crazy. He was unpredictable. And he was not afraid to do stupid things like murder people. These guys are just morons. And so, it felt like there was no huge obstacle to overcome with them outside of them just being slightly unhinged when they would yell. And that was it. Them just being stupid.
Miranda and I, we're watching The Tudors right now.
That's what she was saying.
And that came out in 2007 was the first season. And I got reminded of... There's a trope in modern entertainment that for somebody to be unhinged, it's just yelling, that's it. That's where power comes from. That's where intimidation comes, is just yelling. And watching The Tudors made me realize that might be someplace where that came from. Basically, The Tudors follows Henry VIII. If I got that wrong, she's going to kill me, but I think it's Henry VIII. And how he became mad. He has all this power and all that. And the guy who plays him is able to yell at people, but then immediately calm back down and get back to his kingliness and be like, be gone with you. And you can feel the tension. He's able to yell, but he also has the power. We all
just
understand
as powerful
it.
in his quiet moments.
He's just as powerful. And these emperors don't have that. Where the hell is the power coming from?
Right.
As an audience member, I have no idea. It seems like the people who are in the movie have no idea. They just suck.
True.
You know?
True. They suck for the sake of sucking. Well, that was one of my biggest problems, if we're drawing parallels to the first movie, was Lucius's character versus Maximus's character. Was that I think he drew kind of the wrong lessons from that movie in terms of emulating either a similar performance or Maximus's character at all. Was that Maximus was actually stoic. Like he was just as strong when he was quiet, and he showed it. He showed it in his actions, and he showed it and then in his words when he would channel the arena. And in this one, it was the same kind of deal, but more towards like he seemed almost apathetic. Like he's like, oh, I'm over this and I don't want to be here. To where he had kind of this deadpan quality through most of the stuff, where he just was this mute, almost mute kind of guy who would then, get up and kick some ass, and then he'd jump into a spiel if people happened to listen, and then people rallied over him for some reason, or rallied with him for some reason. He'd give a spiel, and that was it. He never demonstrated earning any of that. And he never embodied kind of the stoicism that Russell Crowe was able to portray in his character, where he didn't care what other people thought in a similar way that Lucius didn't. But he showed it by making allies where it mattered, where he was an honest character through and through, but he was also so immensely powerful in his quietness and so immensely powerful in his skill. And you knew where his skill came from because he came from being a general. And in this case, you had none of that with Lucius. He just was a rando thrust into this position. And you're like, okay, so he hasn't earned the audience's trust in who he is and what he's doing, because we haven't developed him in any way that's demonstrated that. And so that's, massive divide between Russell Crowe and him, in the way that he just was this apathetic kind of character who then got power because of his daddy, and then, or something like that. And then you had Russell Crowe, who actually was this stoic and emboldened character that sure didn't want to be there, but he pushed through it, and he did so genuinely, and he demonstrated that constantly in what he was doing. It just felt like this false for Lucius. It felt like a false like he falsely earned it. I'm trying to think what the right word is, but
yeah, false prophet's the wrong thing, but I think I see what I see what you mean.
Yeah. He was undeserving of that title.
It wouldn't be that big of a problem if he had other morals or something.
Was a different person.
If he was a different person. For some reason, Gladiator 2 insisted on making sure that Lucius was seen as Maximus in every single scene, rallying different troops, somehow becoming the leader of an army that was completely undeserved. Having people follow him, like you said, for absolutely no reason. Just he laughed at your jokes, and that's why you're following him.
One fight against a monkey, and then I guess they admired that. I don't know.
Right? Do you think that the guy getting impaled by the rhino, who didn't follow Lucius's command, do you think that was the scriptwriters trying to say that the people that saw that happen now follow him? And that's it?
I don't even know. I don't even know if the scriptwriter was present during the writing of the script.
It feels like it, yeah.
Yeah, it was ridiculous in that way. He just was quiet and they kept Denzel's character kept saying that he wanted a fighter who was enraged or something like that.
This guy was enraged ever.
He kept saying like, yeah, I see rage in you, and you're like, okay. I mean, you saw him kill people accurately fairly often, but like he never demonstrated that he was this unhinged, rage-driven person. Every time he was not in the arena, he was just stone cold silent and unlikable. And then when he was in the arena, he was fairly calculating, but not, I wouldn't ever say that rage or enraged is a adjective I'd ever use on him.
I don't think
so. I don't know
anger.
Where that came from.
Yeah.
So that makes me wonder if it was truly script or actor. So I don't know. I think it was a marriage of both, but
what's really too bad about it too is that I first off, I disagree with the whole thing of even making Lucius be the main character. Find somebody else, in my opinion. Yeah, it's
or don't make the movie at all.
Right. Don't make it, or I would say find somebody else, because you're already going to fall into the trap of a masterpiece that you then have to try to, live up to. But anyway, since they did go with the choice of Lucius, and because Denzel was looking for somebody filled with rage, I think that there could be something there, actually. I mean, after all, according to Gladiator 2, Lucius was unfairly sent away from his throne and had to go live out the rest of his days away from what was truly his. Why not play into that? Why not play into the fact that the Prince of Rome, as he came to be called afterwards,
is taken away from his kingdom and has to get back.
His kingdom and has to get back, or has to find something, or maybe he did find, a love in Africa and decided he wanted to live there because his people had abandoned him. Then when all of this battle gets taken and he gets brought back to Rome unwillingly, that he then, spreads the word, oh, yep, I was the Prince of Rome, and look at me now. This is how Rome has fallen. And then you can have an arc about people saying, you left us. Rome has become horrible since you left. It could go down that way and give him some motivation to
every
actually
single
care.
one of those, retired gladiators or something. Like maybe he brings together all of the past fighters of that time who, when everything fell, they fled because they thought they were going to be jailed or killed or something. And so therein lies the Gladiator 2 part. And he puts together this hodgepodge army to overthrow Rome and bring it back to a republic status. Yeah, that would be so much cooler.
It would be so good.
So maybe we should have written this movie.
I think so. I mean, taking the elements that they put in there, they're there. They actually sound pretty cool when you think about it.
Just mimic the first movie at the end of the day.
They just they wanted to remake it with different man, different guy who is not Russell Crowe and will never be Russell Crowe. Yeah, they had so many opportunities to be able to make it good, and it fell apart. They had the budget. Pascal ended up being not distracting.
Come on. A lot of actors that were already in the first one.
Yes.
They had support, clearly.
And that's let's move on to that. The actors that were originally in the first, which I think was, two of them?
Yeah, it was...
that senator
the
and
senator
Lucilla.
Guy and Lucilla, yeah.
Lucius's mom. And it was good to see them again. Not going to lie.
Yeah, it made it feel a little bit grounded in the first one. But therein lies the problem. You brought them in. Clearly, it's part of the same canon. And now we're retconning things.
Well, you're retconning things, and why did you do nothing with them?
Yeah. You didn't do anything interesting with it. You could have just changed the whole thing. And
he basically shows up, you see him, and then he dies.
Yeah, and he just gets mercilessly killed on the field for no reason, randomly.
I feel bad because he's like a memorable character in the original.
Yeah,
and Lucilla was really good, and I feel like she was probably ruined the most in the script because any of her lines were garbage.
The same kind of stuff. You're Maximus, or you're the son of Maximus. You're the son of Maximus.
Your dad, Maximus.
Yeah. No, honey, no. You're the son of Maximus.
Yeah. Well, the fact too, do you really expect the audience to believe that this mother who had to, we see it in the movie, had to cryingly send her son away for fear of death on his part, then all of a sudden finds out that her son is alive, not only alive, but standing right in front of him, and he doesn't recognize her as his mother, and all she gets is defensive?
Well, and
That's not how a mother would act.
No, definitely not.
That's ridiculous. No audience is going to believe that.
Some really cool stuff with that, too, now that you bring it up. Could you imagine how much cooler hers and his arc would have been had she had visited his cell, every night and told stories of his childhood? Or, come in and tried to reestablish that relationship? How much more meaningful that would have been for his arc to discover who he was as a kid, and then he could share stories once he gains trust with her on what has happened and who he's become. And then you would see her grown as a character to figure out what has happened between her losing him and now. So he could be filled in on the state of Rome. Ridley, we're here.
We're here.
Give us a call.
Come on. This rage-filled man who has all this loss in his life and then finds out that the people that he thought that he was running away from because they outcast him, or mad at him because the Prince of Rome left us, and this is how things are. And like you said, then incorporate the mom to tell the stories, and this is how it happened. This is how the twins came to power.
Exactly. We would have learned things.
We would have. She could have.
And they would have been meaningful. And
she's in the box. Yeah. She's in the box. She would know how the twins came to power.
Well, she's been there the whole, what they say, 15 years at this point for this movie?
16.
16 years?
16
she was there the whole time. Tell the story. Bring the audience in and take away one of the fights. I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, okay, so do you want to talk about fights?
Yes. Okay, we have a better script now. Let's move on to fights.
So in terms of fights and things, I'm not going to even speak on period accuracy. I don't freaking know. But I'm sure a sea battle occurred. Sharks?
No.
Why were there sharks? There were like a dozen sharks in the Colosseum eating people.
The flooded Colosseum with the boats, which I didn't know if that was true or not. Thank goodness Miranda was sitting there because she was able to let me know that, in fact, they absolutely did flood the Colosseum at least a few times. So to see that, understand that it was historically accurate that even happened, it's like, oh, this is kind of sick. And like, it's people's entertainment, so it's completely different. So 2 boats going at it in a flooded arena with different little islands and stuff, like, okay, I can get behind that.
The spectacle's cool.
We also, for just a movie storytelling device, we already saw a sea battle, so it kind of plays in. The main character was fighting on land, so that's kind of dumb. But at least there was ocean battle and then ocean Colosseum battle, and that was pretty cool. But yeah, sharks?
Well, and then piggybacking off of sharks back to the monkeys, which I know is everyone's qualm with the bad CGI that was in this movie. Lots of good. This was bad. The real question is like, okay, at the end of the day, can you suspend your disbelief to be like, okay, this happened in the case of this movie, fine. The problem with it is that it immediately takes away any stakes that any of these characters have by introducing something even like sharks, where it's like, okay, there's the big sea battle, but at some point... it's sort of like we talked about when we talked about Apollo 13 when his wife dropped the ring down the drain. A lot of people complained thinking that was dumb because it felt out of place in the way that it was like too dramatic. It's like speaking to something that's like, oh, that's too much. And so it pulls you right out of the story. Same kind of deal here. You're like, okay, I can believe that there's maybe boats in the Colosseum. Like, I don't know historically. In this case, it sounded like there was. But then when you pepper in sharks and you pepper in, like, you might as well put lasers on their heads like in Austin Powers, because
freaking lasers,
at that point, I was so pulled out of the story. Who cares what they could have put alligators in there, they could have put whales, and I would have been like, I'm already out.
Bunch of CG Danny DeVitos swimming around.
And honestly, that would have been better.
That would be pretty sick,
that would have been cool. And so that therein lies the problem with, like, it's in a way it's okay to have your CGI fest or have something as seemingly farcical as boats in the middle of the Colosseum. But the minute you pepper those in, or the CG monkeys at the beginning, any sort of anything just doesn't work.
Dude, I'm in the same exact boat. And to talk about how distracting it was, did you notice, again, I think it's actually really cool to have the boats in the Colosseum, especially if it's historically accurate, which Miranda says it was, so awesome. But did you notice that the editing of the boat scene made no sense?
Oh, yeah. We can get into that then, because I've got plenty of notes on that one.
How come arrows were just coming from nowhere?
And not hitting anyone important. That was kind of
they hit
the
nobody
Star Wars
important.
syndrome.
We didn't know which bow was doing it. Nobody had bows.
And it was constant arrows.
It was constant.
The whole time. Yeah, he was there like steering the rudder and everyone else was getting shot. Yeah. Classic action movie crap.
And that was so frustrating to watch. Especially because it feels like a ridiculous premise, but it looked sick and they had the CG to pull it off and everything. But then you screw it up in the editing? What? Come on.
So there you go. So we can get to this even more with cinematography with the final scores. I had a huge problem with the cinematography in this movie because it consistently broke the 180-degree rule. Consistently. And fine, Ridley Scott, whoever's DP was, your professionals, do it. But none of it was ever story-serving. And the ways that it did it, like there was the one scene where...
Oh, just before you dive in, for anybody who doesn't know what the 180 rule is, it basically is a way for us to be able to set our cameras to get the proper motion blur, so it looks natural.
No. 180 degree for framing.
Oh, for framing?
Yeah, so basically meaning that the cameras need to stay on the same axis, so you've got your actors on this line, to stay on this side of 180 degrees. Because if you go onto this side, it only just disorients your audience.
Oh, so a blocking 180.
Yes,
okay,
blocking,
I got you.
Yeah, no,
I noticed the frame rate stuff was
angle.
funky too.
Yes, you are correct. I have a lot of issues with the cinematography.
That's funny.
Movie.
They got both 180
Both
degrees
was wrong. They did. Yeah, so in this case, typically, especially with conversations, you don't want to break that invisible line because it just throws off the orientation of your audience. And especially in environments where they're unfamiliar with it, because usually a lot of places can pull it off by starting correctly. You get a really good idea of where you are, or maybe you get a nice wide shot and it pulls around, you get a good view, and then you start breaking it. But in this one, there were several instances where characters would come in, they'd meet, and then you'd get a shot over her shoulder, and then a shot over his, and then you get a shot from over here, and then it pivoted up here, and then you're around over here, and I'm like, where am I? It happened like in every scene, easily every scene, to the point where when I think about it and I try to like draw the mental picture, outside of the Colosseum, I don't really know what anything looked like in this movie. I don't remember, they spent a lot of times in like the senator chamber and stuff like that, or like in courtyards and things. They're just this blur of what the hell. Like, I think the scene I'm mainly talking about was the one with Pedro Pascal and Lucia, the husband-wife. And they were having that big conversation. She was telling him that Lucius was her son. And they were in a courtyard. And there were cuts to and from every angle in that entire scene, over someone's shoulder randomly, his and hers, and then there was a wide over here, and then they walked out and they moved over. I'm like, where are we? And where are we going? And even for the fight scenes, I remember that a lot. Like, they would be battling over, from one direction over someone's shoulder, and there was never anything that took us to the other side. We were just suddenly there, or we were suddenly way over here. Consistently, to the point that I noticed. And usually I don't notice that kind of thing unless it really pulls me out. And in this case, it did it a lot, to where we were on every side of the actor all the time. And I'm like, where are we in space and time here? So that was a big problem for me.
That really explains the disjointedness. Mm-hmm. Now, it's very easy to pick the script and acting and all that stuff. But yeah, you're right. Simple scenes where we just need to know what's happening.
2 cameras.
Felt so disjointed.
Yep.
They did. I guess I didn't notice exactly why, but that makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. I felt it. I couldn't put words to it.
You just felt constantly disoriented.
Yes, constantly. Mm-hmm. The only time where it felt like maybe it wasn't was the dude who came in on a rhino, which another positive. That dude looked sick.
He did.
I gotta be honest.
That was cool looking. Yes.
When we saw the rhino, I was like, what the hell? And then I saw there's a dude on top of it, and he's standing in Gladiator. He's like, crowd. It was like,
yeah,
that's cool. That's
cool.
what I want in my Gladiator movie. A badass villain guy. We know he's going to die, but that's sick. Anyway, when it was just that dude and Lucius fighting on the ground, I think they did a better job because I was able to understand where they were in the arena and all that stuff. But the rest of the fight scenes, like the boat one, let's go back to that.
Mm-hmm. That was very disorienting.
How the hell did they get to the Emperor's thing?
Yep.
I had no idea the boats were heading that way.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden they're there
Rammed.
and the big thing is on fire. And it's just like, what? When did that happen? There's a crossbow all of a sudden? What?
Yep.
There was no setup for anything.
There was a lot of just and then the sharks mucked it up a lot because people would fall in and get eaten, and then you'd kind of have to reset where you are.
I don't want Jaws in my Gladiator movie. I'm sorry. I don't
what did you say? You said Jaws 5 or something?
Jaws 8 Gladiator. I wish if the sharks had helmets, it would be sick.
Way better than Jaws 3D. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. That to me was a huge problem. There were a lot of other cinematography related problems. Like one of the cameras.
Sorry. I just had a total thought.
Yeah.
I want to be clear about them breaking the 180 rule in this. You mentioned that it wasn't story serving. Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Because any of these rules that we talk about are absolutely guidelines. Mm-hmm.
Especially to pros in theory.
Yes. So it's something where if you don't know how to shoot the scene, or in general you're just trying to make it simple so the audience can understand this is what you should do. There are plenty of times where people go past the 180-degree rule, and
you just have to know how to break it.
You have to know how to break it.
To break it and why to break it.
And in this movie didn't do that.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the problem with it. Continue.
Yeah, sure. So with the cinematography part too, I felt like None of it was like bad. I mean, there were pretty enough shots and everything too. But with a lot of it, I noticed a lot of like out of focus and wandering focus shots. I don't know if you noticed that, but
Even
there was
the opening
one
scene.
specific camera in a lot of the dialogue scenes where like a character would walk out in front of the focus plane and then they would remain out of focus until they kind of got back into the focus plane. And that happened consistently on like 3 camera setups. 2 of them are whatever, multi-camera setups. Most of them were fine. There was always like 1 camera that was out. So I'm like, A, you have a shit focus puller. Or B, do you have a focus puller? What is happening and it was, so here's the thing, like I'll forgive it for a scene or 2 if I notice it. Usually I don't notice that kind of thing because it's done, the scenes are shallow enough, it's artistic enough that, the character wanders and that's fine. But like it, particularly in the conversation with Lucia or whatever, and Lucius, I noticed it consistently, and it's in part because we rewatched the scene, that she was in and out of focus all the time based on her distance. And then I noticed it there, and then I continued to notice it through the movie. And I'm like, something as simple as, it's not simple. I mean, at the end of the day, focus pulling, God's work. But like, blockbuster movie, $250 million, $150 million more than the first one. And at the end of the day, you can't even pull focus. So it really just felt so phoned in at that point to me that I lost credibility with even the cinematography.
Yes. And for those who don't know, focus seems like something that's really, really easy. I mean, here we have a 2-camera setup, and hopefully the focus is like right on our eyeballs. Yep. Autofocus exists. In Hollywood, they have completely manual cameras. Autofocus on most cameras isn't a thing. So there's a dedicated person who is actually pulling focus. They have to keep like the nose perfectly in focus or the eyeball perfectly in focus throughout an entire scene. It's an insane job.
And the optics that they're working with, like on these cameras here, we have the opening of the camera dictates the depth of field, the blurriness. So the smaller that number, in which case we're shooting on a 2.8, they're probably shooting on a 1.4 or something. So they're shooting with the lens so wide open that their focus plane is seriously like an inch margin. And in a lot of these scenes, it creates that really nice shallow depth of field, but it means that the focus puller is really having to do their job. So they'll take tape measures from the sensor of their camera to the place they're pulling focus to and actually map out the distance. And so in this case, either someone didn't do their homework, the focus puller was asleep, or I'm just too picky, probably all of it. But it was enough that I noticed it consistently, that the focus puller was just like, turning their dial and they just missed the shot or something, or they had it marked on there with their gaff tape just a little bit off.
I'm gonna go ahead and say that that's a really bad thing on their part. We don't know if it's.
But how did it get past the director, and how did it not get reshot? Or at the moment, and from Video Village, how did they not notice it?
Yes, that's the thing. Modern movies, there's no excuses. If you guys start paying attention to focus pulling in some old classics, Pulp Fiction, or anything that had to be filmed on film, so anything
you didn't have playback.
Yeah, well, anything before Star Wars Episode 2, which was the first fully digital movie, anything before that, you didn't have playback. You didn't have these things. You might go on different takes because the focus puller knew that they just messed it up. That's a common thing. But there's a lot of times where the take is just so perfect and maybe went a little bit out of focus. You can't do anything and it doesn't matter that much. But today, like what Daniel's saying, they have Video Village. Their job is to just rewatch, make sure there's no technical faults.
They've got LiDAR.
They have LiDARs.
You have the option of LiDAR.
We have autofocus right here. Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah, exactly. So, and for talking heads, like, come on, guys.
And that's what that was.
I mean, almost all of them were talking heads. I can forgive action. That's
action
fine.
Scenes,
that's hard. Yeah. But these were talking heads where no one was moving.
You can redo it. It's on a tripod.
Yeah,
just have the actors say it again.
Yep.
Let's move on. Get the focus right.
That killed me every time I saw it. It was subtle, but it was enough that, on an HD TV, especially when you see like super crispy this talking head and then really blurry this talking head, you're like, okay, I notice it more.
Totally.
Yeah. That's splitting hairs, but like I noticed it. It pulled me out of the story sufficiently. Probably the 6 or 7 times I noticed it.
Something was wrong, for sure, with the actual filming of it, because there was the 180-degree rule you talked about, the blocking of it. There was what you just mentioned, the focus pulling was off. I didn't notice it as much, but I'm glad you did. And then the other one is the frame rates. It was so when
Either frame rates or shutter speed, something was off.
Something was off. In cameras, there's different shutter speeds. I'm sure, or there's different frame rates. Everybody knows that. You can go onto your iPhone and click between 24, 30, 60, 120. Slow-mo guys go up to 100,000, whatever. That's how many frames are actually played per second. There's another thing called shutter speed, and that is what we tune to be able to get the proper motion blur. That's what I was talking about earlier. And one of those two things was off in certain scenes. And it looked like maybe they had tried to go a stylistic route, which absolutely can work. A lot of the times, like Gatorade or Nike commercials have a higher frame rate to give it that action-packed feel and stuff. And it works because it's stylized and it fits what they're going for. But in this movie, it would be like, especially when Lucius was being pulled into Rome in his carriage right outside the Colosseum, that's the one that stuck out most to me. It was like crowd, 24 frames a second, nice motion blur. All of a sudden, it's his face inside of the carriage, and it's like cranked. It's going too fast. It felt like,
did you see any of the Hobbit? You've seen all the Hobbit movies, right?
Yeah.
And how I don't know if it was all of them or one of them or whichever ones there were, that they were shot in 48 frames a second. It felt like that, where it had this kind of uncanny feel.
Yeah.
And I agree, it wasn't all the time, but there were moments where the action sequences, usually you'll either crank the frame rate or the shutter speed, so you don't have as much motion blur in action sequences. It gives them that high intensity feel, and it decreases the motion blur so you can see what's happening. But in this case, the action sequences generally followed that rule, but there were lots of
action scenes I don't have a problem
with.
Right,
there were lots of non-action scenes that were that way. Like, I do remember that too, and they might have done it because he was in front of a green screen and they needed clarity, and they never tried to amend that in post, so they shot it at a higher shutter speed so they could get a cleaner key. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. There were a few shots like that where they were like extra sharp or extra true to life feeling that the motion blur was not cinematic and kind of weird.
It was so strange. The term unprofessional came to mind. Now,
inexperienced for mine.
Yeah, which is mind blowing.
For a Hollywood
you already
movie.
said the budget
For a Ridley movie.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, it's stuff that if it was a smaller movie, if it was an older movie, if it was
totally forgivable.
X, Y, and Z, totally forgivable. But in this one, or if it was just a stylistic choice too, you know, we've already had other movies where it was like, yeah, it was a stylistic choice. I don't agree with it, but I get it. You know, that's just not my cup of tea. And this one, it's just like 1 2-second shot out of a 5-minute scene is like that.
If it was,
just for no
lean
reason.
into it. Yeah. So people know it's stylistic.
Yes.
And yeah. And he's not like Kubrick, so it's not like you're gonna, listen to Ridley Scott being like, yes, this 2-second scene was, he's English, but I can't do that very well, was, this particular frame rate for whatever reason. He's not that. He builds worlds well. Like, don't get me wrong. He's built some cool worlds, but like...
True.
No.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's just jarring. And it really kind of hammers in the point I think that we're making overall was that this felt very phoned in. It felt very unprofessional. It felt very piecemeal, especially for like a $240 million tentpole. Like, it's, it felt disingenuous and not true to what he was, did the first time at all. Just bloated,
Yeah. You know what's funny? The only expectation that I set for myself on this particular review was that I might judge this more harshly because it's OG,
did so well.
Because it's a legendary masterpiece, that I might judge this more harshly. What I'm finding by watching it and talking to you about it, that's not the case. I'm not judging it more harshly as I expected to. We're finding flaws. We're not trying to find them. They're just like, whoa, what the heck?
Well, and when you get pulled out, that's kind of the metric. Is like you get pulled out of the story being told because of these. There's a flaw. Sorry.
There's a huge flaw. So, yeah, Gladiator 2, not worth the watch.
Do you want to hit our list?
Yeah, I think we've
hammered in the point.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So we have 6 different categories that we rate our movies based off of to keep it a little bit more grounded. We've each chosen 3 of them, and we've come together. Basically, we rate each of these 1 through 5 points. We take the average of all of that, and we equate that to stars on Letterboxd. So at the end of the day, we give it a 3.5 star, 4 star, 5. So our categories are uniqueness, cinematography, story, execution, immersion, and emotional connection. So you want to cut first or talk about them first?
Yeah, let's go ahead and cut. We'll get our scores, and we'll be right back.
All right, we are back with our final tallies. So we're going to go one by one and give our ratings 1 through 5, give you that average, and we'll see where we're sitting. So, all right, Matt, kick us off with uniqueness. 1 out of 5.
1.
Oh.
Uniqueness, I'm going to give it a 1. And it's because they're trying to tell the story that's already been told. That's the number one problem. We mentioned that the character that didn't earn what Maximus had earned, they were trying to make Maximus 2.0. Uniqueness is a 1. It just isn't.
Fair enough. I was telling Matthew my metric is that like 0 is absolute garbage, 2.5 is average, and 5 is phenomenal. It's you know, I gave this 2.5. It's average. I would say that the first one has it going that he, you know, came from a high status and then was a slave and had to move up the ranks, and that was an interesting story. This one, our main character, Lucius, didn't have any of that. But the side stories that were happening, while not fleshed out, were enough to maybe not satiate, but were enough to like keep me kind of invested more so than his story. So in that way, I will give the uniqueness of those little side stories, especially Denzel's arc, a 2.5. It was average.
You know, actually on Denzel's arc, if they did flesh it out more,
It would have been a good movie in its own way.
it actually would have gotten a lot more points for me. Because Denzel,
Only interesting character.
unfortunately wasted. I think that's a good compliment to Denzel, is that he was wasted in this movie. Because there was about 15 minutes close to the end where it was like, oh, yeah, all right. Oh, well, that's what his plan was? But we didn't know he had a plan.
No.
That was the problem.
Not at all. We had no idea. And there wasn't really ever a twist moment or anything either where you're like, oh, I mean, he kills the emperor, but you kind of saw him conniving before that.
Yeah.
Because I kept asking, why is he in the like press box with them the whole time? Isn't he this like Gladiator curator? Why is he the only one in there?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay.
Like, we've already seen a Gladiator curator in the other one, and he wasn't in the Emperor's press box.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, that's okay. So, okay, cinematography.
Cinematography, 3.
Oh,
actually.
okay. All right.
3 for me because we already gave credit to the CGI stuff, and a lot of the set design was cool and all that stuff. So it gets a 3 because it was pretty to look at for the majority of it. It does not get any higher because there were some very simple mistakes that we don't know what caused them or who caused them, but they happened and they ended up on the movie that we watched. So 3. Looked good. That's about it.
That's about it. I also gave it an average rating of 2.5. Same to your point of the big overarching shots of like, oh, this is the Colosseum from an aerial view. Cool. And sure, it is the cinematographer that dictates that view. But honestly, kudos to the VFX artist who like made it look that good. And then he just happened to say, no, just give me a top down kind of view. So like, you know, I don't know. I was so disoriented the majority of the time. There were no shots that really stood out to me as being amazing or scrumptious in any way.
Right,
and it really didn't have any sort of distinct style. It felt like the generic kind of CGI modern version of a Gladiator movie. It just, at least where Dune did things that were, you know, distinct sand colored tones and then the infrared like black and white sequences where it really leaned into a style and gave you something unique and a feast for the eyes. This one was fine.
Yeah, and I guess you could argue there were like the blue night scenes or afternoon or something.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I should lower my score. The day for night scenes. And for anyone wondering what that means, it means they literally shot a nighttime scene during the day, and in post-production, they made it look like nighttime. And the way you can tell is that all of the colors that should be more saturated, like fire, are not. They're desaturated. All of the shadows are really sharp. And then you have this like otherworldly amount of brightness coming from the sky, the sun. And so there were like 5 of those over the course of this. And every time I saw it, you heard me shout out at least 2, like day for night. Those sucked, man. Those sucked. Those were so bad.
Yes,
It's
there was
so
one in particular
obvious.
that was just like, it was literally midday. You could see the sun rays coming through the trees.
Ultra sharp shadows.
Yeah.
And like, you know, when you shoot a nighttime photo with your phone, that with darkness comes saturation. It's kind of the thing that happens in
Or
photography.
lack thereof, you mean?
No, more saturation typically when you compensate with longer shutter speeds and things.
Oh,
Usually it gets
okay.
more
I got
saturated.
you.
And so in these cases you had these, like you saw the fire in the thing. And it was this like washed out color, and it wasn't emanating any brightness. It was equally as washed out as the bright highlights of the rest of the scene. The whole scene was just lowered in brightness a little bit, and the shadows were brought down, or were brought up, and the brightness was brought down, and then it gave a blue tint. And you could see it on everything, including the fire.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. That was low marks. Go for it.
Let me keep your score where it's at,
Okay.
because maybe you disagree with me.
Sure.
The afterlife scenes, I thought style wise,
True.
were pretty cool.
Those are actually a good example of the maybe not so much because they were slow mo, the frame rate, but it's almost like they shot them with a higher frame rate and a higher shutter speed, because they had kind of like the water had this cool kind of glassy, almost like molasses look to it.
It looked unreal.
That's fair.
In a good way.
That's fair. It's fair.
They meant absolutely nothing, but they looked pretty.
You're right.
So
It
the
didn't even motivate
cinematography.
Sure. It was different. Yeah, and then they kept reusing the same shots.
All right, Mr. Daniel, I'm going to have you start with story for me.
Okay. Story was a 2. It was below average because it didn't add anything to the original. The original story is good. I mean, it's a good story. I don't mean that sarcastically. And this one did basically the original story, but a lesser version. So in that case, I gave it a 2. So I see your score.
He
Tell
sees
me.
my score, ladies and gentlemen. It's a 0. The story in this movie didn't happen. There were things that the guy got from different places. That doesn't count as a story to me. What was it? Retconning the old one? Is that the story? If that counts as a story, then what the hell are we doing with movies? It's a 0, man. This story sucked. Anyway.
Nothing of interest.
Nothing at all. We already complained about the fact that the only interesting parts were Denzel's thing, and he didn't get any story except for like 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that was the most interesting part, but there was no setup for it. There was no payoff. It was just, hey.
Yeah, I'm here, and I'm Denzel, and I'm cool. And fair
And
enough.
then random fight. The fight scene between Denzel and Lucius, I didn't understand. We know nothing about Denzel Washington's character. We know nothing. We know not
If he
any
can
of his
fight,
back character.
who he is, why.
How is he a better fighter
He
than
did
this
show
guy?
his little brand. So I guess in a way he
So
was a past.
Is that supposed to say that he was put
was
into
a-
slavery very similar to
That
him?
he was a past, I guess, gladiator.
Right, but is that all? Is that the only way people get branded? We don't know that.
I don't know.
We
That's
have
why
no
they
idea.
did. They had
Nobody
that
even
branding scene at
said
the beginning. So
you have the mark of a soldier or slave
Or
or,
at
some
least he was a
prisoner of
slave.
war. Nobody said what it actually means. We saw
Yeah.
it happen to them, but we don't know if it happens to other people too. Anyway,
yeah.
story's a 0. You can't just retcon a masterpiece and call that a story. 0.
Okay. So how did they execute that non-existent story in your opinion?
2.
Okay.
It's the saving grace, again, it really just ties into cinematography, if I'm honest.
Okay.
The cinematography,
It was
again,
pretty enough to watch.
pretty enough to watch. I wasn't just like, ew, gross. And the acting, I would say. Pascal was good. Denzel Washington was good. Again, I think that the two characters, Lucilla and that one senator who were from the original, also Thrax. He was pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
That one totally garbage senator, which was great. He was great garbage.
Right.
I think they did pretty solid. I think that the senator and Lucilla got gypped. I think the script just threw them away, or maybe the editing, whatever. They just didn't work.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the actor's fault. I know that for a fact.
Yeah, I don't think any of it, except maybe Lucius. I think he maybe was the
His
weakest
acting
actor.
wasn't very good.
Yeah.
He didn't know what his character was.
No,
And that
definitely
might
not.
not be the actor's fault.
It might not, but if Denzel could
Wouldn't
ham up his
surprise me.
character, then maybe Lucius could too.
True.
Yeah, in terms of execution for mine, same kind of stuff. It was solely based on how good it looked and how, the costumes were great, the sets were great, and the CGI, at least environments, were really great. And so, at the end of the day, I felt like I was in that world, and I guess if they executed that, then great. The acting was passable, although the script was atrocious, and I had no clue what was happening most of the time. Yeah, 3. Little all right.
Go ahead and take immersion. To begin
Okay,
with.
immersion. I said 3.5. I will be honest, I was pretty thoroughly bored most of this movie. I was not feeling this movie. I was doing everything I could. But I also know that like the first one gets kind of long in moments too. So I was trying to give it everything. I think for the same reasons I specified for execution, the world building, the scale of everything, I thought I gave it a 3.5 in terms of immersion, because like being put in that world, there wasn't anything ridiculously jarring outside of the weird CG animals. And so generally I was average amount immersed in this world, slightly over average. So, okay, hit it.
0.
Ugh.
I couldn't get immersed at all. And I was giving it the benefit of the doubt. You know, when we saw the main character and we didn't get to know his name, I was like, oh, this is probably going to tie in somewhere. And then 50 minutes in, I'm giving it hope. I'm like, okay, okay. That was, okay, whatever. We'll just keep going with it. Okay, let's go. We'll figure out, as soon as I get something about the character that we haven't been told whether we're supposed to care about him, but he's getting the most screen time, then I'll make a decision. And as soon as they said something about it being Lucius, I was like,
I'm out.
Really?
I'm out.
That's what you just held out for? Was that it was the kid who you then make a decision in this movie that he had to get sent away? That didn't even happen in the original? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm out. So
fair.
I was looking around. I didn't exactly check my watch. I guess if there was immersion, it was for me.
Consistently.
Yeah.
I was bored.
For me, I was consistently thinking about, like, what does that mean? If it wasn't faults of the movie, it was historical inaccuracies. If it wasn't historical inaccuracies, it was shutter speed. Yeah. If it wasn't this, it wasn't that. If it wasn't any of that, it was the two armies coming together at the end, following this random guy that abandoned them 16 years ago and going, yeah. And
then they didn't fight. They just turned around.
Nothing. The armies were inconsequential.
Stared at each other for 5 minutes.
I was completely unimmersed. I was so active in thinking about what the hell is this movie saying that it was the opposite of immersion. So it's a 0.
That's fair.
All right. Emotional connection.
I gave it a 2. Reason for that was that at least some very faint themes of like betrayal and stuff like that are in there. And I remember the first movie being so inherent in those themes that you really felt them. Like you felt genuinely bad for these people who were getting killed because they got betrayed, or the emperor was being such a jerk that he, as you felt angry, you hated him. You actually felt condemned for people and things. In this one, I gave it a 2 mostly because while they were not particularly strong glimmers, they weren't even average glimmers. They were glimmers. They were there. I couldn't say personally relate to any of it, but I felt a little something in the moments I needed to, I guess. And I think maybe as I think about it more and say it out loud, it was all the moments where they tied it back to Russell Crowe. And then at the end of the movie, you hear like the Hans Zimmer, Lisa Gerrard part. Because even the music didn't really do anything in this movie. Like I love Harry Gregson Williams, but he didn't do anything. And so there wasn't even like the score to fall back on, except for the end of the movie when you hear that and you're just like, oh crap, I really wish this was the first movie. So maybe it was a false emotional connection. So I won't give it all the way down to 0, but there were glimmers.
Well, I will. Emotional connection's another 0.
Dude, you're going to make our score a half a star here, huh?
Dude, I can't even tell you. I didn't give a crap what happened to the main character. Mm-hmm. We weren't given anything.
I didn't either, but Pedro Pascal bumped my score a little bit.
Yeah, I guess a little bit, but then he died from sniper arrows inconsequentially again.
Yeah.
And we don't get to...
Well, kind of. He made the people rebel.
I guess. Was he the reason that they rebelled? Mm-hmm. Was he?
I think so,
they were chanting his name a little bit.
Because right after that, people were like setting fires in the streets.
Right, but that was only because Lucius started to say stuff.
He had his speech too.
Yeah,
but I think it was both.
No, they didn't care that much. They were saying the stuff, and then it was fighting and everything.
Well, but Lucius wouldn't have said what he said without. I'm just challenging you now.
Sure, no, challenge me.
Without him getting shot.
But Lucius didn't give a shit about him. He wanted his head on a plate, and then
he turned randomly, and he's like, "I'm not going to kill him."
For no reason. It made no sense.
Well, hey, your emotional connection was anger.
Yeah, which doesn't count as an emotional connection. If I'm angry at what the movie makers did in the movie and not something that happened in the movie, that doesn't count. So emotional connection is an absolute 0.
You have your average?
I do have my average.
What's your average?
Really easy. It's a 1.
Yeah? Oh,
I
yeah,
have-
1, 3, 2.
I got 6 points out of 6 categories, therefore an average of
True.
1.
Okay. I'll raise your 1 to a 2.58.
Ooh, that's a big score there, Daniel.
I know. Do you have our total?
Here, let me get it perfect with the 0.58. So 2.58. Gladiator 2, Gladiator. We have given you notes, and your final score out of 5 is a 1.79. You get 2
stars.
bad stars from us.
2 thumbs up.
No.
Not
right,
synonymous.
he's right about
Yeah,
there.
yeah, you
if
get
we're
a-
rating
you
it
get
on
a
thumbs,
there.
it's about there. You're not dead because the
0,
movie
1.
exists, I guess.
2.5, 3, 4, 5.
Something like
Something like
that.
that.
You're about there, and you get a 2 stars, which is actually even less from us, 1.79 average. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't watch this. We do this every single Friday. We see movies on Tuesday. If you have suggestions for us, leave them in the comments. Make sure to share this with your friends, especially if they like movies. And we will see something next week.
We will. If you have comments on this particular one, we had a lot of good comment engagement on our last video, which was super nice. So if you have thoughts, if you something we missed, or if you have you want to commiserate with our disdain for this movie at this very moment, drop a comment and a link.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for watching. Have a good rest of your night, and good night.